With the United Methodist Church's continuing anti-gay rhetoric throughout history, many Methodist churches have had no choice but to fight against this institution and create a more inclusive environment for all people. One of the churches included in this fight is Broadway United Methodist Church, located in Chicago. To start off, let's look at a brief history of Broadway United Methodist Church. Broadway United Methodist Church is a Methodist church located on Broadway Avenue in Boys Town. It was first started in 1891 in a vacant store at 1673 North Halsted Street. Now, one of the most famous priests to come to Broadway was Reverend Gregory Dell, and he came in 1995. While he served for the church, he would perform same-sex marriages on occasion when requested, but he required many counseling sessions for same-sex and heterosexual unions alike. After the trial of Reverend Jimmy Creech, a man who was practicing same-sex unions in his own church, the Judicial Council of the United Methodist Church decided the sanction against same-sex unions acted as church law, and so Reverend Gregory was brought to trial and suspended in 1998. And now Broadway continues to fight vigorously for LGBT rights to this day. To understand how it is that Broadway has gotten to this point, it is important to look at what it is that the United Methodist Church has done in the past to perpetuate their anti-gay rhetoric. Now, historically, many Methodist churches have been gay-friendly, but in 1999, the Judicial Council of the United Methodist Church, which makes most of the decisions for the institution and decides what it is that the church believes and creates church law, decided that the sanction against same-sex unions, which had existed in the Book of Discipline, acted as church law. Then in 2017, at the Baltimore-Washington Annual Conference, the Judicial Council ruled that Karen P. Oliveto, a candidate for bishop, could not be a bishop because she was in a same-sex union, stating the fact that the Book of Discipline states that, quote, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church, end quote. And most recently, in February of 2019, Methodist leaders gathered in St. Louis at the special session of the General Conference. At this conference, many people were expecting this to be the time that they would finally change the rhetoric that they have had for so long and allow same-sex unions. But unfortunately, they decided and voted to reaffirm church teaching that homosexual practice is, quote, incompatible with Christian teaching. With this decision, they rejected same-sex unions and the ordination of sexually active homosexuals under the traditional plan, which was approved in a narrow vote. Along with this, penalties were increased for ministers who attempted to perform a same-sex wedding. So how is it that Broadway United Methodist Church has responded to these actions in the past? For this, I will be using information which I have gathered from emails I have received from Deacon Barclay, who serves at Broadway United Methodist Church, and Mary, the Secretary of Dignity Chicago, which is a gay-friendly Catholic organization fighting for LGBT rights, which also resides within Broadway United Methodist Church. When I spoke to Barclay, they told me that the biggest thing about Broadway United Methodist Church is that they have been, quote, a place of sanctuary for many LGBTQ people who desire a place to worship that fully affirms their sexual orientation and or gender identity. And Broadway United Methodist Church is what is called a reconciling congregation, which means that they are avidly fighting for LGBT rights and reject the teachings of the United Methodist Church despite the consequences that come with it. When speaking to Mary, she told me that after the decision in the late 1990s to ban gay marriages, Broadway United Methodist Church had to come up with a clever way to be able to continue performing these same-sex unions without obviously going against the teachings of the United Methodist Church so as not to risk being shut down and losing their power. So what they came up with is that the teaching of the United Methodist Church is that the wedding vows may not be said in a church. So they take the couples outside to say their vows outside of the churches. And that way they're not breaking any of the rules. On a less serious note, Broadway United Methodist Church simply continues to be a great place for LGBT people to come and they are very inclusive. Deacon Barclay is actually gender fluid, which is truly a testament to just how open and inclusive they are. And they do this by simply being open, and they also hold events for LGBT people, and Dignity Chicago does this as well. And they take part in the Chicago Pride parades and all of these different kinds of things, simply showing their support constantly for the LGBT community in very concrete ways. So for my research, I decided that it would also be good to look at how other churches are fighting and how they compare to Broadway United Methodist Church, and how they can reveal a little bit more about what it is Broadway may be feeling. So for this, I picked up the book Surrendering My Ordination, Standing Up for Gay and Lesbian Inclusivity in the United Methodist Church, written by former pastor J. Philip Wagaman. And I also read Will LGBT Activists Split the Methodists?, written on the Catholic News Agency website. Starting with Surrendering My Ordination, J. Philip Wagaman is a professor of Christian ethics and former president of the American Theological Society, former president of the Society of Christian Ethics, and former senior pastor at Foundry United Methodist Church. Now, in his book, he discusses his many years of ordination and what led him to his decision to give it up. After the decision in the 90s to not allow Karen to become a bishop because of her marriage, he knew that he could no longer serve the United Methodist Church. Karen was someone he had known personally and knew that she was more deserving of the role than many people he had met, and he could not understand how one simple fact about her life could control her entire destiny. In a similar fashion, following the 2019 decision just this past February, many churches were outraged, and many of them put up rainbow flags, and one church covered the words United Methodist on their church sign. And now in May, objectors of the 2019 decision will be gathering at United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas, which is the largest Methodist church in the U.S., to show the United Methodist Church how it is that they are truly feeling about these decisions that have been made. So the big question is, why here? Why is it that Broadway United Methodist Church is here in Chicago, and what about being in Chicago and being in a urban environment has shaped what they have become? And their connection to cityness lies within the Gant argument, which his argument is that certain people come to the city, and many of the groups of people that he describes tend to be younger people, and younger people tend to be much more liberal. And on top of that, because there are more young liberal people coming to the city, many LGBT people are also attracted to the city because they know that the city will provide a home to them that their suburban and rural communities could not provide for them. So because of this, LGBT issues become bigger in churches, and churches can't simply ignore the fact that these people exist. Now, Broadway United Methodist Church is located in Boys Town, and Boys Town is a gay neighborhood in Chicago, which has been a hub for LGBT political activism. WBEZ released an article written by Stephen Jackson and Jason Nargis, and was produced in partnership with Chicago Collections, which provided the research expertise and other assistance during its development. The history of Boys Town is what gives context to why it is that Broadway United Methodist Church is where it is, and why it is able to function as well as it does. In the 60s, Chicago was known as a very queer town, but the hubs for queer people were very spread out throughout Chicago. But, quote, a lot of it was centered around downtown River North and Tower Town in the mid part of the last century, and then slowly as rents went up and other things happened, the community was forced out, end quote. So because of gentrification, these individuals and the businesses that they brought were pushed out of their areas and were pushed more northeast around the Diversey or Broadway Clark Street area. Some of these gay enclaves, as they were called, included the Bronzeville neighborhood, the Loop, and the Levee. But then in the 80s, there began to open many gay-owned bars in the area around North Halsted Street in what is now Boys Town. However, in this era, the average lifespan of gay bars was around 2 to 3 years because the city and the police pressured these gay bars in a way that made it very obvious to them that they were not welcome there. So having all of these gay-owned establishments was incredibly important to establishing a home for the LGBT community in the Lakeview neighborhood. So these bars continued to fight for what they wanted, and they opened and stayed open, and this created a snowball effect where more and more people started to come to this area, and more businesses came, and these businesses attracted more people, and these people continued to attract more businesses. And these bars also became important places during the AIDS crisis because this is where people could come and feel safe, and this is where people organized protests and they organized movements during the AIDS crisis. And having a place to call home was incredibly important for these people at this time. During this period, the bars would also host voter registration drives, and they would become meeting spaces for many organizations and causes within the LGBT community. Finally, by the 1990s, this strip on Halsted had earned the nickname that we now know, Boys Town, and this name came from a weekly column from the time called Boys Town by Rex Walkner, which ran in the gay Chicago newspaper Outlines. However, many of the businesses in this neighborhood didn't like it because it made them seem like they were anti-woman. However, this was honestly the truth of this strip because this neighborhood mainly catered to gay white men, as it really does now, even though they are starting to become better about that. So now, in the modern era, while Boys Town may not be the political hub that it once may have been, because now we are dealing with a little bit less issues legally. Obviously, there is still so much more to fight, but we are dealing with so much less than Boys Town did when it first opened. But now it is so important because it has become a home in Chicago for the LGBT community, no matter how free they might be to express their sexuality where they are. This will always be a home for LGBT people, and that is why Broadway United Methodist Church is here, because Boys Town has created this opportunity for them to insert themselves into this neighborhood and cater to the community that is in Chicago, this community that was created because of the people that came, because of the young liberal people who came to the city, according to Gantz's argument. And that is why Broadway United Methodist Church is a very special city phenomenon, because without the long history of the fight for LGBT rights in Boys Town and in Chicago as a whole, Broadway United Methodist Church would have absolutely no reason to be there and would not have the power that it does today.